When the books of history record the beginning of the Christian era in Egypt, they usually start with the advent of Saint Mark to Alexandria, at the north coast of Egypt. And that is somehow true, for he is the one who came to Egypt as a preacher of Christianity in 65 AD. But if you want to be precise, the first one who set foot in Egypt was Jesus himself, as a baby. It was a dark period of the Romans ruling the ancient world then. The Roman Emperor Herodot ordered the killing of each newborn boy in Bethlehem, following a prophecy that said that the newborn will replace him as a king. Mary the Virgin gave birth at that time to Jesus, and fearing for his life, she decided to flee to Egypt, assisted by Joseph the carpenter. The first part of the Egyptian land they set foot in was Sinai. Sinai Desert is a border of Egypt toward the east, and there was a famous route in the north called Horus Road that was used by the ancient Egyptians themselves to travel to their territories in the northeast all the way to the Euphrates River. The Holy Family traveled in Sinai through harsh circumstances, reaching the Nile Valley and settling in it for almost 3 years. The places where they rested are marked by many landmarks. For example, in Elminia there is a center or a city called El Banasa, where an old tree lies still with its long branches and green leaves, standing witness to the place where Mary and her family rested for a while before continuing their way to the west. Another landmark in the same governorate is Virgin Mary Monastery. The Monastery of Virgin Mary was built around a cave that's also considered an important resting place for the Holy Family. The location itself lies above a hill where the baby hand of Jesus was relieved on its stones when he placed his hand on it to protect his mother from the falling down of that rock. It was a belief in Christian faith that drove Queen Helena, the Roman Empress, to travel to Sinai in the 5th century to commemorate her memory with the Christian religion and her religious beliefs. To do that, she chose the site of the burning bush, where God spoke to Moses through the flames of that bush. Around it, she built a small church and called it the Church of Virgin Mary. In 525, her son Emperor Constantine declared Christianity to be a formal religion in Egypt, ending a whole era of persecution of Christians. Many Christians were persecuted by the Roman kings, especially in Egypt, that has witnessed a dark era called the Era of the Martyrs. The Coptics escaped from their cities in the north and took refuge in the temples of the south. Many temples still have marks of the churches which were made by the Copts inside the ancient Egyptian temples. Today, the temples still have marks on their walls from that period, like Philae Temple in Aswan, Kalabsha Temple behind the High Dam in Aswan, and Dendera and Esna temples. When Emperor Constantine declared Christianity as a formal religion, he decided to continue the work of his mother in Sinai. He continued her work in the church, but in a massive scale. He surrounded the church, which he enlarged by additional buildings with walls, and turned it into a monastery. At that time, the monastery was still called Virgin Mary, until one day the monks found the discovery of the century then. They found the relics of a virgin girl who was tortured by the Romans in Alexandria, and her body was dismantled then. The remains were above the highest peak in Egypt, Mount St. Catherine, that reaches 2,642 meters. The relics were taken down to be preserved in the monastery, and they actually gave the monastery its worldwide fame when the word got out that the saint's remains were found in a good condition. Pilgrims came to visit the monastery to see her head and hands inside the caskets in the monastery, and to pray for the innocent virgin who was tortured and killed, defending her religion. In a paradoxical chain of life events, it's a Muslim tribe who has been looking after the monastery and its monks for ages until now. It's the Jebaliya tribe, which name reflects the life of its people, for it means the people of the mountains. The monastery of St. Catherine is one remarkable place that tells a lot about the history of Christianity in Egypt, and also the historical events that followed the Arabs' advent to Egypt later. When the Arabs advanced to Egypt, led by the Muslim leader Amr ibn al-As, they reached the city of El-Bahnasa by the Nile in Middle Egypt. There, they met a fearful Roman army, as it was an important trading center in Egypt then, famous by its richness and farms and gardens. A small convent for nuns was right out of the city. The 7 nuns who lived there helped the Arabs' army by supplying them with food and water and shelter to help them besieging the city and defeating the Romans, which they did eventually. Those nuns deserve to be honored after their death, and their church and burials are visited today as they have entered through the eternal gate of honorable Christian history. Monasticism is a pure 100% Egyptian invention. It's a solitary act of a Christian priest who chose to isolate himself from the world and live alone in a desert place where he could be as close as possible to God. That was the personal idea and choice of an Egyptian priest called Antonius, who lived in the 4th century AD. He chose a cave in a mountain in the desert and called it a cell, and encouraged his followers to do the same. Many priests followed his lead, each living in a secluded place away from the other. They would meet each Saturday and pray together, and they spread the idea in Natrun Valley and El Fayoum and Palestine too. They became the founders of monasticism, spreading it in and out of Egypt. Later on, the idea developed, and instead of living separately, Bishop Pachomius thought of building the cells next to each other, with a church in the center and a wall surrounding the whole thing. This construction became what was known later as a monastery. The priest had to learn reading first, so that he can read the Bible with his fellows. They ate together in the food hall twice a day, at noon and at night, and some of them learned how to master simple handcrafts that would support their harsh life. By time, the monks led a life that was totally self-sufficient. They cultivated their own food and dug wells to be constant sources of water, or lived in desert areas thus close to the Nile, like the monastery of Saint Simeon in Aswan. Monasticism spread out of Egypt after delegations from Palestine and Syria and Armenia and Greeks came to Egypt to visit the Egyptian monasteries. Later on, the Egyptian monks traveled to Europe to spread the idea of monasticism. There is no wonder in that, since Egypt is the founder of sciences and philosophical and spiritual matters by which the world lives today. The monasteries that stood witness to the Christian history in Egypt were kept preserved by the Egyptian Church, and most of them are still used till today. One of the best examples of these marvelous monasteries is Abahur Monastery. The church of Abahur is totally cut out in the rocks, but originally it was the site of an ancient Roman temple that has turned just like many other temples in Egypt, built during the Greek-Roman period, into churches after the end of the Roman persecution. The entrance to the church is a vault cut out into the rocks and reaches a hall that's quite impressive, with its width and vastness of area and great condition. Inside, there is a vertical hall with an ancient well, and a horizontal hall intermediated by an empty square that's covered with a dome. In front of the court, there are two altars cut out into the rocks. The northern one is from the Roman era. There are several empty parts in the southern wall of the court. They were used as old tombs. The chest boxes where people ask for wishes and donate, or promise of certain givings in case their wishes come true, are there too, together with pictures of saints. There are ancient copies of the Bible well preserved, behind glasses for all visitors to see, and they add sanctity and richness to the ancient cave. The altars are made of wood that's inlaid with crosses made of ivory, a style that prevailed in altars as well as prayer niches in the old mosques of Egypt. There are ancient stone jars used in the old church or monastery for water use, and they are kept in the church as well. The church of Abahur is still used till today, being a part of the big church of Dimiana, and being a part of the Christian heritage which the Copts of Egypt cherish and like to keep in hearts and mind forever. The Christians come and pray in front of the altar and pay tributes to the icons of their saints, an image which is found in all the ancient churches and monasteries of Egypt. The icons are those paintings of Christian figures that were drawn long time ago and are considered monuments in themselves within the monumental place. They basically represent saints who died as martyrs during the era called the Era of the Martyrs, being killed by the Romans during their occupation of Egypt. These massacres ended by the Roman Emperor Constantine, who believed in Christianity himself and declared Egypt to be a Christian country. Coptic religious handwritings are well kept, thanks to the Coptic Church of Egypt. Coptic comes as a fourth and last handwriting of the ancient Egyptian language, invented by the priests to write the Bible without using animal pagan figures existing in the hieroglyphic handwritings. Crosses are also carved on the walls, beyond doubt by Christians who used to come and pray in this church. The original wooden gate of Abahur Church still exists and used. It used to be closed with a wooden lock bar that simply slides to the wall. Above the ancient church of Abahur exists the modern church of Saint Dimiana. It was built by the new priest Abahur, named after the old priest. Saint Dimiana is a very famous Coptic martyr of the 4th century in Egypt. She and the 40 virgins are the founder of monasticism for Coptic Orthodox nuns, which transferred to the rest of the world later. Thus, Egypt, which was a pioneer in introducing Christianity and the Bible and monasticism to the world, has also introduced nunnery. Today, this church stands as a very good example of modern churches in Egypt.